What the fresh hell is this? If you've ever felt powerless in the face of a bully, smash that like button right now and subscribe, because you are not alone. And comment where you're watching from tonight. Maybe a neighbor is watching this very same story, feeling the very same way. Let me cover that for you, sir. We all fall on hard times. Ava Rodriguez spoke with a gentleness that defied the acid churning in her gut. Her voice was a low, steady hum, a stark contrast to the clatter of plates and boisterous chatter filling the worn-out gantry diner. She slid her hand over the check before the old man could reach for it again, her fingers trembling just enough to betray the calm she projected. The diner was a sea of anonymous faces, but in that sliver of a moment, the world shrank to the space between their two booth tables. The man, whose face was a roadmap of exhaustion, blinked slowly. He didn't just look tired, he looked defeated, worn down to the very nub of his soul. His eyes, webbed with red veins, stared at her as if she were a mirage. His beard was a wild, untrimmed thicket of gray and white, and his coat was a pathetic shield against the biting Chicago wind that rattled the diner's front windows. Everything about him screamed of a life lived on the razor's edge of survival. "I can't let you do that, little lady," he rasped, his voice a gravelly whisper. His eyes darted nervously towards the cash register, where a hulking figure stood watching. "You don't even know me." Ava offered a small, sad smile, the corners of her lips pulling upward despite the knot of anxiety tightening in her chest. "That's not the point, is it? I know what it's like to count pennies for a gallon of milk. I've had days where a hot meal felt like a 5-star luxury." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Please, just let me. No judgment. Just a meal." The old man looked down at his hands, calloused and cracked, his knuckles swollen and angry. He didn't answer, but the profound slump of his shoulders, the way the last bit of fight seemed to drain from him, was an answer in itself. It was a surrender born not of weakness, but of profound weariness. Behind the counter, the heavy, rhythmic thud of steel-toed boots echoed across the grimy linoleum floor. Frank Miller, the diner's manager and a petty tyrant in a grease-stained polo shirt, was marching toward them. The shirt stretched taut across his beer belly, and the smug, predatory swagger in his step was a familiar omen of misery to every single person who worked under him. "What the hell is going on here, Rodriguez?" he barked, his voice deliberately loud enough to curdle the coffee in nearby mugs. A few conversations sputtered and died as heads turned in their direction. Ava stood up straighter, instinctively positioning herself slightly in front of the old man, a fragile shield against the coming storm. "He didn't have enough for his meal, Frank. I was going to pay for him." Frank let out a short, derisive laugh that sounded like rocks in a blender. "You? With what? The pity coins you get from old ladies and the chump change from the breakfast rush?" He shot a venomous glance at the old man, his lips curling into a sneer that exposed yellowed teeth. "I told you before, girl, this ain't a damn homeless shelter, and you," he jabbed a thick, sausage-like finger toward the seated man, "can take your bum act and your gutter smell somewhere else. We serve paying customers here." Ava's breath hitched in her throat. She'd been called worse in her 26 years, but the way he spat the word "girl," heavy with a disdain so thick it felt like tar, laced with just enough poison to remind her of her place in his world, made her skin prickle with a familiar, hot shame. "Frank, please," she said, her voice dropping to a placating whisper. "It's only $15.25. I'll pay it myself. Right now." He stepped closer, invading her personal space, his beer and onion breath washing over her. His voice dropped to a low, menacing growl meant only for her. "You people always think you can bend the rules, don't you? This place runs on order, Rodriguez, not your bleeding heart sympathy. Don't you dare use that skin of yours like some kind of shield, thinking you can get away with this charity crap. Ava froze. The world tilted. It wasn't the first time Frank had made a comment like that, a casual, cruel jab at her heritage, but this time it was different. This time it was sharp enough to draw blood. Her mind flashed to her mother's pale, tired face, her nephew Leo's unfinished homework spread across their tiny kitchen table, the glaring red of the overdue rent notice tacked to the fridge. She needed this job. It wasn't a career, it was a lifeline, and Frank held the knife. "I wasn't trying to cause any trouble," she whispered, the panic she'd been suppressing finally seeping into her voice, making it thin and reedy. "Please, I didn't mean anything by it. I'll cover it. Okay? Just don't make a scene." But Frank was already shaking his head, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. He was enjoying this. "You're done, Ava. That's it. You're fired. Pack your things. You're out." The words struck her with the force of a physical blow. "No, please, Frank, I need this job," she begged, her voice cracking, the carefully constructed dam of her composure finally breaking. "Please don't do this. I'll never do it again, I swear." Hot, shameful tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them, spilling down her cheeks. She hated crying in front of people, hated the way it made her feel small, powerless, exactly like he wanted her to feel. Her knees felt like they might buckle. "I said you're out," he snarled, his face reddening with rage. "You think this is about charity? It's about liability. You want to play the hero? Do it on your own damn time with your own damn money?" "I'm sorry," Ava gasped, the words tumbling out between sobs. "I'm so sorry." The old man finally stood, his movements shaky and uncertain. "Sir," he said, his voice surprisingly firm despite his frail appearance, "this was my fault. She was only trying to help me. You shouldn't punish her for an act of kindness." "Shut up," Frank snapped, whirling on him. "You got no place speaking here. You walked in reeking like you slept in an alley, couldn't afford a damn omelet, and now you think you have the right to lecture me? Get out, both of you." The old man's face flushed with a deep, painful red. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He lowered his eyes, and the sheer weight of his humiliation was a palpable thing, a wave of heat rolling off him. Ava looked between the two men, her cheeks wet with tears, her pride shattered into a million tiny pieces on the greasy diner floor. Frank turned back to her, his victory complete. "Get your stuff and get out. Now." With trembling hands, she untied the strings of her stained apron, folded it with a reverence it didn't deserve, and laid it gently on the counter. She turned to the old man, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry this happened." He shook his head slowly, his tired eyes meeting hers. "You have nothing to be sorry for, young lady. Nothing at all." She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat, and turned to walk away, to disappear into the cold Chicago afternoon and the uncertainty of unemployment. "I believe that's quite enough." The voice was calm, deep, and carried an effortless, quiet authority that sliced through the diner's tense atmosphere like a razor. Ava froze mid-step. Frank's head jerked toward the old man, his face a mask of disbelief and scorn. "What did you just say to me, old man?" he sneered. The man didn't answer. Instead, he reached into the pocket of his thin, worn coat and pulled out a sleek black leather card holder. From it, he slid a single heavy card made of brushed metal. Embossed in gold lettering were the words, "Alexander Covington, founder and chairman, Covington Hospitality Group." A collective gasp rippled through the restaurant. "Holy hell!" someone whispered from a nearby booth. "That's him! That's Alexander Covington!" The whispers grew, morphing into a wave of hushed excitement, bouncing from table to table. Phones were discreetly pulled out, cameras angled for a covert photo. The billionaire who had started with a single coffee cart and built a global empire of restaurants, hotels, and diners. The very diner they were sitting in. Frank's face drained of all color, turning a pasty, sickly white. He took an involuntary step back, his bravado vanishing like smoke. "No, wait. Yes," the man, Alexander Covington, said, placing the card holder on the counter with a deliberate, echoing click. "I own this diner. In fact, I own the entire Covington hospitality chain, and I do, on occasion, dress down and drop in unannounced. You know, just to see how my employees treat people when they think no one important is watching." Frank stumbled over his words, his tongue suddenly thick and useless. "Sir, I didn't know. It was a misunderstanding. I was just upholding company policy, sir." Alexander raised a hand, and the simple gesture carried the weight of a judge's gavel. "Stop, just stop. I've seen and heard more than enough. I watched you humiliate this young woman," he said, gesturing to Ava. "For an act of basic human compassion, I watched you insult her, her character, and her heritage. And I watched you verbally abuse a stranger who you believed had no power, no voice, no value." The restaurant was now dead silent. You could hear the faint buzz of the neon sign outside. "Frank Miller," Alexander said, his voice dropping to a low, lethal calm. "You are, as of this moment, relieved of your duties. You will receive your termination papers by the end of the day. Security will escort you out." Frank's mouth hung open, a silent, gaping "oh" of shock and ruin. Alexander then turned his gaze to Ava. "Miss Rodriguez, was it?" She blinked, startled to be addressed so formally, and wiped a tear from her cheek with the back of her hand. "Yes, sir, Ava." "Ava, I owe you an apology. Not just for what you were forced to endure today, but for the fact that a man like him was ever allowed to hold a position of authority in my company." He paused, his eyes softening with a quiet sincerity. "And I owe you my thanks. Thank you for reminding me what this company should stand for." Ava's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they weren't tears of fear or shame. They were tears of disbelief, of a strange, dizzying relief. I was just trying to help." "And that," Alexander said, a genuine smile finally gracing his features, "is precisely why we need people like you. As of today, I would like to offer you a position at our corporate headquarters. We are building a new ethics and community relations department, and I believe it would benefit greatly from your voice." Ava was speechless. Her mind couldn't process the words. From fired to hired, from shame to honor, in the span of 5 minutes. He leaned in, his smile gentle. "Oh, and don't worry about your final paycheck. We'll make sure it's more than fair." A few people in a nearby booth began to clap softly, then a few more. In a matter of seconds, the entire diner erupted into applause, and there, in the middle of the gantry diner, Ava Rodriguez stood surrounded by the sound of justice, a sound she never, ever expected to hear so loudly, so soon. The applause was still a faint, surreal echo in Ava's ears as she stepped out of the gantry diner and into the harsh, unforgiving light of the Chicago afternoon. Her hands were shaking, not from the cold wind that whipped at her thin jacket, but from an overwhelming cocktail of emotions she couldn't yet name. Relief? Shock? Vindication? The stinging humiliation of Frank's words still clung to her like the smell of grease, but it was being slowly replaced by something warmer, something stronger. Hope. She glanced back through the diner's large plate glass window. Frank Miller had vanished into the back, likely to a fate of packing his personal effects in a cardboard box. The other employees were buzzing, moving in a strange, choreographed dance of awe and confusion. A few of them, people who had barely made eye contact with her for months, looked her way and offered small, tentative smiles, smiles that hadn't been there an hour ago. Ava turned away. She couldn't process it all yet. Not here. Not while the air still tasted of burnt coffee and shattered pride. She walked for 3 blocks, her legs moving on autopilot before she slowed, her mind a dizzying kaleidoscope of images and sounds. Frank's snarling face, the cold certainty in Mr. Covington's eyes, the impossible weight of that metal business card, the sudden shocking roar of applause, the way he'd said her name, Miss Rodriguez, as if she were somebody who mattered. She reached a bus stop and sank onto the cold, hard plastic bench, finally letting her breath steady. It was too early to go home, but far too late to pretend her life hadn't just been irrevocably altered. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from her nephew, Leo. "You okay?" Mom is asking. She stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed back with trembling fingers. "Something crazy happened. I'll tell you at dinner. Don't tell Mom yet." She paused, then added, "And yes, I'm good." For the first time in a very long time, that wasn't a lie. The bus ride home was a quiet, contemplative journey through the heart of her world. She sat by the window, watching the familiar landscape of her neighborhood pass by. Corner bodegas with faded awnings, kids playing soccer in a dusty park, an old woman meticulously sweeping her stoop with the same stubborn pride she remembered in her grandmother. By the time she reached her apartment building, the adrenaline had begun to fade, leaving behind a profound sense of exhaustion. Her knees felt unsteady again, but this time it was the kind of weakness that comes after surviving a storm you didn't think you were strong enough to weather. She climbed the 3 flights of stairs slowly, the familiar smells of her building, mildew, cilantro, and old disinfectant, somehow comforting. Her key, as always, stuck in the lock, and she had to jiggle it just right to get the door open. Inside, the apartment was dim and quiet, the only sound the low, steady hum of the ancient refrigerator. Her mother, Sarah, was napping on the couch, a thin, worn blanket pulled up to her chin, her breathing shallow but even. Ava exhaled quietly, a wave of love and worry washing over her as she tiptoed into the kitchen. Leo looked up from his laptop at the small kitchen table, his 14-year-old eyes wide with concern. "You got fired, didn't you?" he asked, his voice low so as not to wake his grandmother. Ava paused, then managed a weary half-smile. "Not exactly." "You texted all mysterious. What happened?" She dropped her bag onto a chair and sank down across from him. "You are not going to believe this. Try me," he said, leaning forward, all his attention focused on her. She told him everything. From the old man who couldn't pay for his meal, to Frank's explosive cruelty, to the shocking reveal of the metal card, to the impossible offer of a corporate job. Leo's jaw dropped somewhere around the part about the billionaire owner. "No way!" he breathed when she finished. "No freaking way!" "I swear, Leo," Ava said, her voice filled with a wonder that was still fresh. "He owns the whole chain, Alexander Covington, the Alexander Covington, like the guy who just funded that new tech lab at your school." "The very same," she confirmed. Leo leaned back in his chair, blinking as he processed the information. "Dang, Aunt Ava, you're like a real-life superhero or something." She laughed, a real, genuine laugh that seemed to bubble up from a place deep inside her that had been silent for too long. "I don't know about that. I just didn't think helping someone was going to completely change my life." Leo grew thoughtful, his expression serious. "Grandma always says the world doesn't reward good people fast enough." Ava nodded, her eyes drifting toward the living room where her mother slept. "She's right. But today it did." Her gaze fell on the clock on the stove. It was only 3:17 p.m. She should still be on her feet, scrubbing syrup off tables and dodging Frank's insults. Instead, she was sitting in her own kitchen, with a story that sounded like something out of a movie. There was a firm knock on the door. She tensed instinctively. Unexpected visitors were rare, and rarely a good thing. Leo peered through the peephole, then turned back, his eyes wide and a grin spreading across his face. "It's a lady in a fancy suit," he whispered. "She's holding a big envelope." Ava frowned, her heart beginning to pound again. She opened the door slowly. A woman in her mid-40s stood in the hallway, impeccably dressed in a sharp blazer and tailored pants, her hair in a neat bun. She offered a polite, professional smile. "Miss Ava Rodriguez?" "Yes?" "I'm Diane Mercer, executive liaison for Mr. Covington. He asked me to deliver this to you personally." She held out a thick, cream-colored envelope with Ava's name handwritten in crisp, elegant black ink. Ava hesitated, her hand hovering in the air. Is this for real?" "It's not a trick, Miss Rodriguez," Diane said, her smile warming slightly. "He is quite serious about the position. He wanted you to have the official offer in writing before the end of the day." Ava accepted the envelope with both hands. It felt heavy, substantial, real. She didn't open it right away. Diane glanced past her into the modest apartment. "He also wanted me to convey that the position is full-time, salaried, with a comprehensive benefits package. The office is in the main tower, downtown. He believes you're exactly the kind of person Covington Hospitality needs more of." Ava's throat tightened. Please thank him for me." "I will," Diane said. She paused, as if remembering something else. "He said one more thing, too. He said, 'Tell her the world doesn't change from the top down. It changes when the people at the bottom refuse to give up on each other.'" Ava didn't know what to say. The words settled over her, a weight and a comfort all at once. Diane nodded respectfully and stepped back. "Have a good evening, Miss Rodriguez." The door closed with a soft click, leaving Ava and Leo standing frozen in the hallway. "What's it say?" Leo whispered, his voice full of awe. Ava carefully broke the wax seal and opened the envelope. Inside was a formal letter of offer, printed on heavy linen paper. At the bottom, just below a salary figure that made her eyes water and her breath catch, was the bold, confident signature of Alexander Covington. Clipped to the back was a smaller, handwritten note on personal letterhead. "Thank you for reminding me what integrity looks like. The world needs more people like you, Ava. AC." She read the line twice, her vision blurring. She handed the letter to Leo with trembling fingers. In the background, her mother stirred on the couch, her soft snores replaced by the sounds of waking. The city kept humming its relentless song outside her window, but for Ava, the world had tilted. Quietly, suddenly, and entirely. And somehow, for the first time in a long, long while, it felt like it had finally tilted in her favor. The next morning, Ava stood before a wall of mirrored elevator doors in a midtown skyscraper, smoothing the lapels of a borrowed blazer for the third time. Her reflection looked surprisingly composed, a woman she barely recognized, but her heart was pounding a frantic jazz solo against her ribs. The building's sleek architecture of glass and polished steel towered over the street like a monument to a world she had only ever seen from the outside. Inside, the air smelled of leather, expensive coffee, and ambition. The floors gleamed, reflecting the purposeful movements of people in sharp suits, heels tapping a rhythmic beat on marble, phones pressed to ears, their smiles trimmed with a cool, practiced calculation. She didn't belong here. Not yet. The elevator chimed a soft, melodic note. The doors slid open onto the 37th floor. Covington Hospitality Group HQ, A receptionist greeted her with a warm, genuine smile. "Miss Rodriguez, Mr. Covington is expecting you. Right this way." Ava followed her down a long hallway lined with framed black and white photographs. Moments frozen in the company's history. A modest corner diner in the Bronx from the 1970s, the groundbreaking of the first franchise in Atlanta, a community outreach event in Detroit, a soup kitchen partnership in Baltimore. The images told a story of humble beginnings, of service, and of something Ava hadn't expected to find in this sterile corporate environment: compassion. The receptionist stopped at a grand walnut door, knocked twice, then opened it. "Mr. Covington, Miss Rodriguez is here. Send her in, please." Ava stepped inside. The office was large but surprisingly unpretentious. Floor-to-ceiling windows bathed the space in natural light, offering a breathtaking view of the city below. A single, overflowing bookshelf lined one wall. At the far end, behind a wide desk of polished oak, sat Alexander Covington. He was clean-shaven now, his hair neatly combed back, wearing a navy suit that fit him like a second skin. But his eyes were the same, calm, watchful, and deeply kind. "Ava," he said, standing and walking around the desk to greet her. "Welcome?" She offered a nervous smile and a firm handshake. "Thank you, Mr. Covington, for everything." He gestured toward a plush leather chair. "Please call me Alexander. And thank you. You reminded me yesterday why I started this company in the first place." Ava sat slowly, careful not to wrinkle her blazer. "I still feel like I'm dreaming." He chuckled, a warm, rich sound. "That makes two of us. When I decided to go undercover, as my security team calls it, I expected to find operational inefficiencies, maybe a few corners being cut. I didn't expect to meet someone who would risk their livelihood for a stranger's dignity." She hesitated, looking down at her hands. "I didn't feel brave. I just felt scared. Frank, he had all the power. I just couldn't stand there and let him do that to that man." "And that is exactly why you are here," Alexander said, leaning forward, his elbows on the desk. "People who act despite their fear. That's courage, Ava, and it's far rarer than you think." Ava swallowed, finding her voice. What exactly would my role be here? The letter mentioned a new department." Alexander smiled. "I want you to help us rebuild the culture we've lost. Over the years, as we expanded, some of our locations started treating profit as the only god. But this company was never just about food. It was about people, community, respect. I want to launch a new division, the Department of Community Ethics and Integrity. You will be its founding director." Her mouth fell open slightly. "Director? But I've never led anything. I've never even worked in a corporate office." "You know how to listen," he countered. "You know how to stand up for what's right. The rest you will learn, and you won't be alone. You'll have my full support." Ava nodded slowly, her mind racing to absorb the scale of what he was offering. "What would I do first?" "You'll visit our highest risk locations, the ones with high turnover and frequent complaints. You'll interview staff, anonymously. You'll observe. You'll report back on what's broken, and you'll make recommendations for how to fix it. And you will have my full authority to initiate reforms." He paused, his gaze intense. "Think of yourself as an internal investigator, a guardian of our values." She stared at him for a long moment, the weight and possibility of it all sinking in. Then she let out a shaky breath. That's big." Alexander stood and walked to the window, his hands in his pockets, looking down at the city sprawling beneath them. "We're building something that can outlive us, Ava. But if we forget why it started, it just becomes another soulless empire. I don't want that. I want Harbor Street to mean something again, to stand for something good." He turned back to her, his eyes bright with conviction. "I want you to help me find our soul again." Ava stood as well, a newfound resolve solidifying within her. "Then I'm in," she said, her voice clear and strong. "All the way in." He smiled. "Good. Then let's begin." As Ava left the office 30 minutes later, she felt taller. She passed employees in expensive suits, interns balancing trays of coffee, executives with tight schedules etched on their faces, and for the first time, she didn't feel like an outsider. She belonged. She had a badge now, an official ID clipped to her lapel, her name printed neatly under the impossible title, Director, Community, Ethics and Integrity. She took the elevator down, stepping out into the brilliant sunlight with a sense of new weight and new purpose. That evening, back at her apartment, her mother was sitting up on the couch for the first time in days, sipping chamomile tea. "You're glowing, mija," she said as Ava walked in. Ava grinned. "I think I got a promotion." Leo popped his head out of his room. Tell her the part where you got your own office with a view." Ava laughed and sat beside her mother, explaining everything, her new job, the meeting with Alexander Covington, the mission he had given her. Her mother listened quietly, her expression shifting from surprise to pride to a quiet, profound reflection. When Ava finished, her mother reached for her hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Your father," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "would have been so proud." Ava looked down, her own eyes welling up. "I hope so, Mom. There is no doubt in my mind." That night, as she lay in bed, Ava stared at the familiar cracks in her ceiling. But for the first time, she wasn't seeing them as a symbol of her struggle. She was seeing them as a map of where she had been. The world had flipped on its axis in less than 24 hours. She'd gone from begging for a minimum wage job to being offered a seat at the table, a voice, a purpose. But deep down, she knew this wasn't just luck. It was the result of a single, simple choice. To do the right thing, even when it cost her everything. And that choice, she realized, was going to be her compass now, guiding her every step of the way. The following Monday, Ava stepped off a plane in Chicago. The same biting wind she'd felt after being fired now snapping at the edges of her new, company-issued trench coat. Her suitcase rolled smoothly behind her, and a tablet buzzed softly in her tote bag, filled with the latest employee feedback reports. This was it. Her first official site visit as Director of Community, Ethics, and Integrity. Her destination was Harbor Street Diner on Tour 44, a high-volume location just south of the Loop that had been repeatedly flagged for anonymous staff complaints and an unusually high turnover rate. Ava had spent the entire weekend preparing, poring over digital files, reading exit interviews filled with veiled warnings, and listening to recordings of customer service calls that hinted at a deeper dysfunction. She had even watched hours of security footage, provided discreetly by corporate compliance. A pattern had emerged, subtle but deeply troubling. The manager, Dennis Holbrook, had been with the company for 6 years. On paper, he ran a tight ship. Profits were up, waste was down. But his employees described the atmosphere as toxic, a revolving door of short-lived hires, with whispers of verbal abuse, blatant favoritism, and, more disturbingly, clear racial disparities in scheduling and disciplinary actions. She checked into a modest hotel a few blocks from the diner, choosing anonymity over the penthouse suite Alexander's office had offered. She needed to blend in, to observe without fanfare. She was here to listen, not to be admired. The next morning, she walked into the diner dressed in jeans and a simple blazer, her hair pulled back. The air was thick with the smell of burnt bacon and stale coffee. It was even busier than the diner where she used to work, with servers moving like hummingbirds between booths and cooks barking orders through the pass-through window. Ava took a seat at the far end of the counter, a spot that gave her a clear view of the entire floor. Within minutes, she was approached by a young black waitress whose name tag read Keisha. Her smile was tired but genuine, a small light in a weary face. "Morning, hun. What can I get for you?" "Just a black coffee for now, thanks," Ava replied warmly. As Keisha poured the coffee, Ava noticed the deep, shadowy bruises under her eyes. Not the physical kind, but the emotional ones. The kind of profound exhaustion that comes from holding back words for too long. "Busy morning?" Ava asked casually. Keisha shrugged, her shoulders slumping. "Always is. Doesn't matter who calls out or quits. We're expected to run at full steam, no excuses." Ava nodded sympathetically. "That must be tough." Keisha leaned in slightly, her eyes flicking towards the kitchen door. "You have no idea." They chatted for a few more minutes about the weather, the city, nothing of consequence. Then Ava thanked her, paid in cash, and left a generous tip that made Keisha's tired eyes widen in surprise. Over the next 2 days, Ava returned 3 more times, each at a different time of day. She watched Dennis Halbrook publicly berate a busboy for spilling water. She saw how Keisha was consistently given the largest, most difficult sections, while a newer, younger white server named Emily was assigned shorter sections and allowed longer, unscheduled breaks. She listened intently as employees vented in hushed, frustrated tones by the soda machine, thinking no one important was listening. But Ava was listening. On the 3rd afternoon, having gathered enough first-hand observation, Ava scheduled a formal mandatory staff meeting through the assistant manager, using her corporate title for the first time. When she walked into the back office that afternoon, dressed in a sleek blazer and holding her tablet, the staff's eyes widened in shock. Keisha looked absolutely stunned. "Wait a minute. You're the lady from the counter," she whispered. "You're from corporate?" Ava offered her a gentle smile. "I am, and I've been listening." The small, cluttered break room fell silent as she introduced herself fully. "I'm not here to punish anyone," she began, her voice calm and clear. "I'm here to understand what's going wrong in this diner and to help make it right. And I'm going to be honest with you. I have seen enough to know that something is fundamentally wrong here." A few employees nodded quietly. Others looked skeptical, their faces masks of ingrained cynicism. No one interrupted. "Let's start simply," Ava continued. "I want each of you to anonymously write down one thing you wish management understood about working here." She handed out small note cards and pens. There was a moment of hesitation, a collective fear of retribution hanging in the air. But eventually, one by one, they began to write. Ava collected the cards herself, ensuring their anonymity. Later that evening in her hotel room, she spread the cards out on her bed and read them. "Stop calling us lazy just because we're not white." Dennis tells customers the help is slow if their food takes a long time. He says it right in front of us. I was written up for being 5 minutes late after my bus broke down. Emily shows up 20 minutes late almost every day, and he just jokes with her about it. He makes fun of my accent when I have to talk to Spanish-speaking customers. Ava sat back, the weight of the words pressing down on her. It wasn't just the sheer volume of complaints, but the deep, personal pain etched into each sentence. It was worse than she'd imagined. This wasn't just poor management. It was a culture of cruelty. The next morning, she met with Dennis Halbrook in his cramped, messy office. He was smug, leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed over his chest, a condescending smirk on his face. "So, you're the new corporate watchdog," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "I'm the new listener," Ava corrected calmly. And from what I've heard and what I've seen, this location isn't just underperforming, it's toxic. Dennis scoffed. Let me guess. Some of the staff are playing the race card. That's their favorite trick when they don't want to be held accountable for their poor performance. Ava's calm never wavered. Are you aware that this location has the highest employee turnover rate in the entire Midwest region? It's a tough market, Dennis shrugged dismissively. You got to be firm with these people. Being firm is one thing, Dennis, Ava said, her tone sharpening, the steel beneath her calm finally showing. But discrimination is another. Harassment is another. Creating an environment of fear is another. His smug expression flickered, just for a second. You can't prove any of that. I don't need to prove it in a court of law to know that it's happening, she said, standing up. I've seen enough, and I've already spoken to Alexander Covington about my preliminary findings. The mention of the owner's name made Dennis turn pale. Ava continued, her voice now carrying the full weight of her authority. You are being placed on administrative leave, effective immediately, pending a formal HR investigation. The details will be handled by my team. Dennis shot up from his chair, his face turning a blotchy red. You can't do this! Yes, she said firmly, meeting his furious gaze without flinching. I can, and I am. She left his office without another word. Later that day, Ava gathered the staff once more. This time they didn't look at her with confusion or skepticism. They looked at her with a fragile, burgeoning hope. I'm not going to promise you overnight miracles, Ava told them, her voice resonating with sincerity. But I will promise you this. Change starts right here. Right now. You all deserve to work in a place where you are treated with respect and dignity. And if Harbor Street is going to live up to its name, then that is non-negotiable. After the meeting, Keisha came up to her, tears welling in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. No one has ever believed us before. Ava smiled, a real warm smile that reached her eyes. I've been where you are, Keisha, and I promise you I'm not leaving you behind. That night, back in her hotel room, Ava looked out at the glittering, indifferent lights of the Chicago skyline. She was exhausted, emotionally drained. The work ahead was daunting, a mountain of distrust and pain to overcome. But for the first time, she felt it settling into her bones. Not fear, not uncertainty, but purpose. Because this wasn't just about diners or profit margins or management structures. It was about dignity. It was about justice. And it was about proving that even in a place as ordinary as a breakfast joint off I-90, the fight for what's right could still be won. One voice at a time. What do you think will happen next? If you have a prediction, drop it in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that matter. 3 weeks later, Ava found herself on a quiet, tree-lined street in Richmond, Virginia, standing outside a small Harbor Street location that looked more like a converted colonial house than a corporate franchise. The old wood siding was faded to a pale blue, and the wide front porch creaked under her boots as she approached. An American flag flapped limply from a pole near the entrance. She could smell fried catfish and sweet cornbread from the sidewalk, a comforting, homey aroma that belied the unease in her gut. This location hadn't been flagged by corporate. There were no official complaints, no HR alerts, no performance metrics indicating anything was out of line. And yet, Alexander Covington had personally asked her to visit. This one, Ava, he'd said over the phone, is a ghost. I get the sense people are too afraid to speak up, and that's often where the real stories are hiding. Ava trusted his instinct. She had learned in her short but intense time on the job that silence didn't always mean peace. Sometimes it meant resignation. As she pushed open the door, a silver bell jingled overhead. The inside was a throwback to the 1960s, with red and white checkered tablecloths, a jukebox humming softly in the corner, and a row of worn wooden booths with red leather seats cracked from decades of use. Behind the counter, an older white woman with a tight perm was pouring coffee into chipped ceramic mugs. She looked up and gave Ava a polite, practiced smile. "Welcome to Harbor Street," she said, her southern accent thick and sweet as molasses. "Seat yourself wherever you like, honey." Ava chose a booth near the back, sliding in slowly and taking in the atmosphere. The room had a strange, oppressive quietness to it, even though half the tables were full. Conversations were hushed, laughter was muted, as if everyone was afraid of being overheard. A group of construction workers sat at the counter, deliberately avoiding eye contact with a black teenage busboy who was meticulously wiping down the soda machine. Ava ordered a black coffee and a slice of pecan pie. The woman behind the counter, whose name tag read Eunice, delivered it with a kind nod, but her smile never quite reached her cold, watchful eyes. As she sipped her coffee, Ava glanced discreetly at the busboy. He moved with a careful, deliberate precision, not clumsy like a teenager, but hyper-aware, as if trying to make himself as small and unnoticeable as possible. His name tag read Tyrell. His shoulders were perpetually hunched, a physical manifestation of his effort to take up less space in the world. When Eunice disappeared into the kitchen, Ava stood up and walked over to him. "Hi," she said softly. "Tyrell, right?" He looked up quickly, startled, his eyes wide with alarm. "Yes, ma'am." "I'm Ava," she said, discreetly flashing her Harbor Street corporate ID. "I'm with the head office." His eyes widened even further, and for a fleeting moment, real, unadulterated fear flickered there. "I'm not here to get anyone in trouble," she added gently. "I just want to understand how things really work around here." He hesitated, his gaze darting toward the swinging kitchen doors. It's fine here, ma'am." "That doesn't sound like the truth, Tyrell." He looked down, his Adam's apple bobbing. "I can't talk here." Ava nodded, understanding immediately. "Can you meet me after your shift?" Tyrell hesitated for a long moment, a silent war playing out behind his eyes. Finally, he gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "The library? Down the street, 6 o'clock." At 5:59 p.m., Ava sat in a quiet study nook at the back of the downtown public library, flipping through her notes. At 6:03, Tyrell slipped into the chair across from her, his hoodie pulled up, his eyes scanning the room nervously. "I don't want to lose my job," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "You won't," Ava assured him. "Anything you tell me stays completely confidential, unless you give me permission to share it." He took a deep breath, the air shuddering out of him. "It's not just racism here. It's fear. It's always been this way. My cousin worked here before me. He got fired for speaking up after a customer spit at him." Ava leaned forward, her pen poised over her notebook. "Did management defend the customer?" "They didn't say it outright, but yeah. Eunice told my cousin, 'You people should know better than to provoke our regulars.'" Tyrell swallowed hard, the memory clearly painful. "It's not just her. The whole town is like this. Quiet, polite on the surface, but you feel it every single day. The looks, the way they talk down to you." Ava sat back, a knot of cold anger forming in her chest. "How long have you worked there?" 4 months. It's the only place hiring kids like me after school, so I don't talk. I don't make eye contact. I just do my job and pray nobody notices me." Ava closed her notebook slowly. "That is not how anyone should have to live, Tyrell." He looked down at the table, his shoulders hunching again. "It's just how it is." She exhaled, a steely resolve hardening in her eyes. "Not anymore. Kai, The next morning, Ava requested a closed-door meeting with the entire location's staff. Unlike the team in Chicago, this group was older, mostly white, mostly Southern, and their skepticism of her presence was a palpable force in the room. Eunice sat stiffly at the head of the table, her arms folded defensively across her chest. "I'm here because this location has a silence problem," Ava began, her voice even and direct. "And silence is a symptom of something deeper. It's a symptom of fear, of mistrust, of pain." Eunice sniffed derisively. "We've never had a single official complaint in the 20 years I've been manager." "That doesn't mean there isn't a problem, Eunice," Ava countered. "It means no one has ever felt safe enough to file one." A tall man in a faded baseball cap frowned. "What exactly are you accusing us of?" "I'm not accusing anyone of anything," Ava said. I'm asking why some of your employees feel invisible. Why are they afraid to speak up when they are mistreated?" The room was quiet. Eunice finally spoke, her voice laced with barely concealed hostility. "With all due respect, Miss Rodriguez, we've run this place just fine for decades without any interference from corporate. We don't mistreat people. We just expect a little respect for our customers and our way of doing things." "Respect goes both ways," Ava replied coolly. "And from what I've seen, it's not being given to everyone who works under this roof." She let her gaze fall on Eunice. "I've seen how Tyrell is treated." Eunice's jaw tightened. "He's young. He needs guidance." "No," Ava said, her voice sharp. "He needs dignity." She pulled a folder from her briefcase. "Starting today, we are implementing new company-wide training protocols on workplace equality and unconscious bias. We're also installing anonymous feedback systems and instituting a policy of rotating regional oversight." This is not optional. Several staff members exchanged uneasy glances. The resistance in the air was thick enough to taste. "Change is never easy," Ava acknowledged, her eyes sweeping across the room. "But Harbor Street is more than just a business. It's a promise to our communities, to our workers, a promise to do what's right." She paused, letting the silence stretch, letting her words sink in. "If you are not on board with that promise," she added, her voice dropping slightly, "then this might not be the right place for you anymore." It was a direct challenge, a shot across the bow, and she knew it. But it was necessary. Later that afternoon, Ava found Tyrell near the back door as he was taking out the trash. "You okay?" she asked gently. He gave a small, uncertain nod. "They're all mad at you." "Maybe," she said. "But change always makes people who are comfortable with the old ways uncomfortable." He looked up at her, a flicker of something new in his eyes. "You think it'll really get better?" She offered him a soft smile. "I think it already has. Because you spoke up, Tyrell. And now someone is finally listening." He didn't say anything, but as he turned to go back inside, he stood a little taller. And that was enough. That night, back in her hotel room, Ava stared at the ceiling. Sleep slow to come. Richmond wasn't like Chicago. The prejudice here was quieter, more insidious, wrapped in a suffocating blanket of politeness. But it was just as real, just as damaging. And it reminded her that the fight she had chosen wasn't going to be clean or easy. It would be messy. It would be painful. It would stretch her in ways she hadn't yet imagined. But as long as there were Tyrells in the world, young people shrinking into silence just to survive, she would keep showing up. Not with judgment, but with truth. Not with anger, but with an unshakable demand for justice. Because dignity wasn't optional, and silence would never be acceptable again. 2 weeks after Richmond, Ava sat on a train bound for Birmingham, Alabama, her journal open in her lap. The rhythmic motion of the carriage rocked her gently, but her thoughts were sharp and unsettled. This next location, Harbor Street, Nakuru 82, was flagged for a different, more insidious reason. There were no racial complaints, no obvious policy violations. On paper, it looked exemplary. But the staff churn rate was abnormally high, especially among young women in entry-level positions. The anonymous exit surveys were filled with vague but chilling descriptions. Uncomfortable pressure, inappropriate comments, a culture of silence. There were no names, no specific incidents, just a pervasive sense of fear. That vagueness made Ava profoundly uneasy. She closed her journal and looked out the window. The Alabama countryside blurred past in a tapestry of early spring greens and golds. This was a different South than Richmond. Here, the pain of the past didn't just linger. It felt like it was still breathing in the humid air. By the time she arrived in Birmingham, the sun was slipping behind the city's modest skyline. Her hotel was, again, unassuming, a short walk from the diner. As she settled into the room, she called Alexander Covington for her weekly update. "I'm in Birmingham," she said, her voice tight, "and this one feels off. I can't put my finger on it yet." Alexander's voice crackled on the speakerphone. "Listen to your gut, Ava. It hasn't failed us yet. These places, the ones that look perfect on the surface, they're often the most dangerous." "I know," she said quietly. "The cleanest smiles can hide the worst rot." He was silent for a moment. Then, "Be careful. You're walking into the fire now." The next morning, Ava arrived at Harbor Street, the Nakuru 82, just after the breakfast rush. It was an unusually modern space for the chain, with large windows, brushed metal fixtures, and spotless floors. A playlist of light jazz filled the air, and the staff moved with a choreographed efficiency, all polished and smiling. Too perfect. The manager, Tony Garrison, greeted her with a warm, practiced handshake and a disarming charm. He was in his early 50s, white, sharply dressed, his silver hair perfectly coiffed. His eyes, however, never quite matched his wide smile. "Miss Rodriguez," he said, guiding her into his office. "I've read about you. Making quite the name for yourself, I hear?" She nodded politely, her senses on high alert. "Just trying to understand what our people are going through on the ground." "Well, you won't find any drama here," Tony chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "We run a clean, happy house?" "I hope so," she said, her own smile not quite reaching her eyes. As the day went on, Ava observed carefully. The team was efficient, almost unnervingly so. But something tugged at her attention. Most of the front-facing roles, the hostesses, the cashiers, the servers, were held by young women, all attractive, all under 30, and none of them looked truly relaxed. She introduced herself discreetly to several of them throughout the day. One hostess, a young woman named Olivia, smiled nervously when Ava showed her ID. "Oh, we're treated fine here," she said, her eyes darting toward the kitchen where Tony stood talking to a cook. Ava saw it again and again. Eye contact that was broken too quickly. Smiles that faltered the moment Tony passed by. Conversations that were cut short when he entered a room. Something was deeply wrong. That night, Ava sat in the hotel bar with her laptop, sipping an iced tea. She began cross-referencing years of exit interviews, employee rosters, and shift schedules for this location. A disturbing pattern emerged. 12 women had left in the past 4 months alone. None had stayed longer than 6 months. Most had started as hostesses or cashiers, then resigned without giving much explanation. She pulled up their emergency contact information. One had listed a domestic violence shelter. Another had no forwarding address at all. The picture was sharpening into something ugly. This wasn't just mismanagement. This was predation. Unreported, covered up, or worse, normalized. The next day, she informed Tony she would be shadowing the front-of-house staff. He didn't argue, but his eyes darkened for a fraction of a second. "Of course," he said smoothly. "Though I'd appreciate a heads up before you start digging too deep. Don't want to scare the horses." Ava's smile remained frozen in place. "I'm not here for the horses, Tony. I'm here for the truth." She spent hours behind the hostess stand, listening, watching. Olivia, now slightly more comfortable with Ava's presence, whispered to her during a lull in service. "Tony, he asks the girls to stay late sometimes," she said, her voice barely audible. "For private meetings. Says it's for mentoring, but none of us feel safe." Ava's jaw tightened. "Has anyone reported it to HR?" "We can't prove anything," Olivia whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "And if we speak up—" She glanced at a security camera mounted on the ceiling. "He finds a way to make sure we don't last long. A bad schedule? A false write-up? Something." Ava reached into her bag and discreetly handed Olivia a business card. "This is a secure, anonymous tip line that goes directly to my office. You can call or text it anytime. Tell the others too." That night, 3 voicemails came in. One was from a shaky voice, describing how Tony would brush up against a waitress's back every single time she entered the kitchen. Another tearfully recounted how he had offered her a promotion in exchange for loyalty and after-hours friendship. A third simply sobbed for 30 seconds and then hung up. Ava documented everything, her fingers flying across her keyboard, her heart a cold, hard stone in her chest. On her final day at the diner, she called a mandatory staff meeting. Tony tried to interject, to control the narrative, but she calmly overrode him. "I've heard enough," she said, addressing the room, her voice clear and unwavering. "Too many stories? Too many patterns?" Tony crossed his arms, his charming facade finally cracking. "You have no hard evidence. This is just hearsay from disgruntled employees." "Maybe not evidence that would stand up in a court of law." "Not yet," Ava replied, her gaze sweeping over the young women in the room. "But the weight of truth doesn't always need a photograph or a recording. It's in the silence. It's in the fear. It's in the turnover rate. It's in the trauma." He smirked, a last-ditch effort at defiance. "Good luck proving that to HR." Ava held up her phone. "They're already listening." Tony froze. "I contacted our internal legal department this morning," she continued, her voice cold as steel. "There is now a formal, high-priority investigation underway, and you, Tony, are suspended without pay, effective immediately." His face turned a furious shade of red. "You are way out of your line." "No," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "I am exactly in line. The line of justice." She turned to the staff, her expression softening. "No one who works here should ever have to choose between their dignity and their paycheck. That culture of fear ends today." The employees didn't cheer. They didn't clap. But one by one, young women looked her in the eye, their expressions a mixture of terror and profound relief. And that was more than enough. Back in her hotel room, Ava sat on the edge of the bed, completely drained. She opened her laptop and began writing her official report. Her fingers ached, but her mind burned with a fierce clarity. She paused to sip some water and glanced at her phone. A message from Alexander had just come through. I read the preliminary notes from legal. "You're doing more than just a job, Ava. You're restoring what people thought they'd lost. You're giving them hope." Ava stared at the words, then closed her eyes, the weight of the last few days pressing down on her. This wasn't just about company policy. It wasn't even just about predators like Tony. It was about Olivia and the girl who sobbed on the phone, and every other woman who had ever been told to just smile and stay quiet. Ava wasn't quiet anymore, and she wasn't going anywhere.